This episode is proudly supported by Fine Food Australia. It's only a few weeks until Fine Food Australia, the country's leading trade event for food service and hospitality, is back on in Sydney. As a professional in the food industry, you know the importance of staying ahead, discovering new trends, connecting with suppliers, and finding the inspiration to move your business forward. For over 40 years, Fine Food Australia has been the ultimate destination for chefs, restaurateurs, cafe owners, food retailers, and distributors alike. With over 900 exhibitors across 12 product categories, featuring both local and global brands, Fine Food Australia is where you'll find what's next, what's new, and what's driving the food industry forward. Make sure you register online before the 8th of September to secure free trade entry, so you don't have to pay $45 at the door. Don't miss Fine Food Australia on from the 8th to the 11th of September at ICC Sydney Darling Harbour. For more information, go to www.finefoodaustralia.com.au.
You know, you finally solve the riddle of this dish or this recipe, and you finally perfected it. I think that's something that I really enjoy, because, it just sort of sums up my career of, the struggles and, finally seeing the light at the end.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. From Melbourne's vibrant culinary scene to the Michelin-starred kitchens of London, today's guest has honed his craft at some of the world's most prestigious establishments. Now, back on the Mornington Peninsula, he's embracing new challenges. Nick McGonigal is the executive chef of the dining room at Lancemore Lindenderry in Red Hill, Victoria. Nick, how are you?
Good, Huck. Thanks for having me.
It's great to get you on the show. You've been in a new role now for 6 months. How are things there at the moment?
It's really going really well. It's a new challenge for me. Going from a head chef role into an executive chef role brings new challenges, but it's also very exciting.
Well, tell us about the difference in that role of, the head chef to executive chef. How are the roles different to what you're used to?
For me before, I had eyes on everything, and the number one noticeable change is for me that I'm not always going to be on the pass. I'm not always going to be in the kitchen, and it's setting the team up to succeed when I'm not there, making sure the food goes out the way I want it to, and making sure everything runs smoothly. That's the biggest challenge. And it comes down to planning, making sure there's recipes and systems in place, because I think that's really the number one thing that needs to happen for me to succeed and for the restaurant to succeed.
With the role of executive chef, which is something new to you, do you sort of look at what you want to get out of the kitchen differently in the way that everything runs?
That's a really hard one. Not really. My goal's still the same. The goal is still to create amazing food and an amazing experience. It's just navigating that in a different sense. And to be honest, I don't think I was going to be an executive chef at this young. I'm only nearly 29, and I didn't really plan for this. I thought maybe later in my career I'll be an executive chef. So I definitely have to try and find my feet as I do it, you could say. But the goal is definitely the same, to make a memorable experience for the guests, for sure.
It's interesting that it wasn't your plan to be an executive chef at a young age, but here you are. So how did it come about? How did the role come about, and what was it like for you to say, okay, I'm going to do it?
For me, I'm always just trying to go to the next challenge. And I think it's, especially early in my career, I was probably quite naive in doing it, just jump into the next challenge. Even maybe I probably wasn't quite ready. But that's just how my mentality of my career has been so far. And then when this opportunity was approached, I was just like, wow, this is such a great opportunity. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but, I wanted to give it a good old crack. And here I am.
Well, tell us about what you're doing at the dining room. How do you describe the restaurant and the food offering to people?
The food for me is, I try to keep it simple and very produce based. So I've been in the peninsula, cooking the peninsula for the last 3 years, and I've built lots of relationships with lots of producers. And for me, it's showcasing the food on the peninsula and telling the stories as well, because I think that's really, well, when I go out and I hear about, tomatoes and the grower and where they're growing, for example, like Daniel's Run Tomatoes, and the producer there's crossbreeding over 200 different varieties. I'm just like, wow, that's so amazing. And that's sort of just like a summary of what we do at the restaurant is we're doing that storytelling at the table. Not for everyone. Some people just want to have lunch and want to get out, but that's sort of my take on things. And people leaving just saying, that was really delicious. The chefs in there have really thought about the process of what they're doing and the flavors, and we'll come back and yeah.
It's a wonderful approach to really put produce in the spotlight like that. And Mornington Peninsula has amazing producers. Is there a couple you can tell us about that you've connected with that you use quite readily on the menu?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the friends of mine and producers is Mary Lucas. She's just a local gardener here, and she does just a range of things, whether it's citrus, microherbs, flowers, heirloom zucchinis, tomatoes, and I currently got her Jerusalem artichokes on the menu. So she's someone she's a local in the area, and when I go visit her, she shows me what's in season, and that's something that's really exciting. It brings a bit of joy, to get out of the kitchen and go see what's in season, what's around. And another person would be Sean. So Sean is actually the restaurateur of Wild Grain, but he's also running a farm at the back of Torello's there, and he's a one man team back there, and we've got his lettuce leaves on our menu. But I see him on a weekly basis, and we have our chats about the restaurant and the industry, and we walk through the farm together and see what he's got going on. But yeah, that's really exciting for us.
That's amazing. But sort of leading with produce and trying to keep things simple on the plate has its challenges to still impress people. Is there a dish or two that you've got on the menu that really speaks of your approach that you can share with us?
Yeah, so at the moment we have a Jerusalem artichoke custard. So obviously I use the Jerusalem artichokes from Mary's, and then I serve it with an onion broth. So it's a very simple broth. It's pretty much just onions that we cook in water overnight, and we reduce down, and the fructose caramelizes and makes a really rich jus, almost like. And then we're serving it with Blender's truffle. So I would say it's simple. It's 3 ingredients really. It's onions, Jerusalem artichokes, and truffle. And everyone loves it, and especially this time of the year when it's cold, it's one of our snacks, and it sort of sets the pace for their experience here. So that's something that I'm really proud of, and our guests are really enjoying.
That sounds extraordinary. I haven't eaten yet today, and I would love to dive into one of those. The Mornington Peninsula is pretty extraordinary. You said you've been there a couple of years now. What do you love about the area?
I think there's just so many hidden gems, when you think you know it all, and then you meet a new supplier or you go to a new farm or something, you just how have I never been here? There's so many hidden gems, and I think people in Melbourne, they really need to come out here more, because you can come to the restaurant, have a great experience, and we have a lot of Main Ridge dairy products in our menu, and it's just you can go down to Main Ridge Dairy for an afternoon tea and pat the goats, and people are like, wow, you can go down there and pat goats. It's like things like that are really I don't know, it's very nostalgic. I think it makes people feel young again, for me, I think I'm really excited about that stuff, and I think a lot of other people are as well. They just don't know it yet.
You mentioned you're only 29 and you're in this amazing role already. Take us back to when you were young. Has food always been a big part of your life growing up when you were a kid?
Yeah, I used to eat a lot, so you could say it definitely was. And I used to do a lot of baking, and the show yeah, like MasterChef and Kitchen Nightmares. mum and dad never let me stay up, but when Kitchen Nightmares was on at 9:30, and it's just like, all right, I can stay up an extra hour and watch that. So it really has, and it's not until recently, I looked back on it and I was just like, wow, it was very clear at a young age I was going to be a chef, but I didn't know it back then. But going through like high school and VCE and that, the hours and the salary, they're not that attractive. And so, like most high school graduates, I went to VCE not really sure of it and realized very quickly that, it wasn't what I wanted to do. And mum's like, you used to want to be a chef when you're younger. Why don't you give that a crack? And so I got my first opportunity at an events venue in St Kilda, and I never looked back at it. I started working there, and after 2 weeks, my head chef said to me, "So, do you want to do an apprenticeship?" And I was just like, "Yeah, okay, sure." And the last 10 years have gone so quickly.
Well, you've worked at some extraordinary venues, which we'll get into, but in those really early years, is there any sort of mentor or venue that really stands out as you were starting to build sort of your skills?
Brett Graham of the Ledbury was very aspiring. He's a very hard worker, and I think that's why a lot of Aussies are attracted to go work there for him, like I did. He's definitely a mentor, but also there's a lot of people that I haven't really met in person, but like I've followed on media or read their books that have really been inspiring to me. Because I did, like, when I was an apprentice, I did a lot of reading, and I'm someone that I wouldn't read a book. I wouldn't read a book in high school. I never read a book in high school, and I write an essay on it. But when I was an apprentice, I just read. I just read like cookbooks. I read especially autobiographies, and there's a lot of people like Grana Katz, Gordon Ramsay, Jesse Shankar. Like, there's books like those that I've read, and I've learned so much from those people. And it's so weird to say that I'm like a mentor, but like listening through their stories, learning from their experiences, it's really been, yeah, like definitely affected my career, influenced my career. And that was probably the main reason why I decided to go, you know what, I'm going to finish my apprenticeship and I'm going to get the first plane to a Michelin restaurant. And the reason why I ended up in London is because I don't speak Spanish, French, or Italian. So I was like, I have to go to the UK. And I later found out that a lot of Aussies were doing that. And Brett Graham, who is Australian, he did that at 21. And that's why so many Aussies go there to work for him, to sort of follow into his footsteps.
What was it like for you personally landing in London? Was it a bit of a shock for you, and stepping into the kitchen as well at the Ledbury?
Yeah, like I said, I finished my apprenticeship, and 2 weeks later I was in London. I remember my first day in London. It was 2018, and it was the hottest heat wave in London in like history. It was like 38 degrees, and I had to get from Heathrow to East London with two massive suitcases because I was obviously didn't think about it and overpacked. And yeah, it was an eye opener. Like, I rocked up to my home off my first rental, and obviously I paid a deposit up front, and there were those drug addicts living there pretty much. So it was sort of like, okay, well, I have to find a new home very quickly. But it's all the life experiences, I suppose. And like, I laugh about now, I lost a lot of money that day, but yeah, it's character building, and then stepping into the Ledbury was definitely, wow, these guys are the real deal. Like, I thought I knew how to cook, and I had no idea. And I was very naive, and people told me that going to London before was just like, you're not going to last, you're going to come home in a few months. And like, the probability was I was going to, but I had to stick it out because that's what I promised myself when I went over there, that I'm going to, prove the doubters wrong.
There's been a lot of guests on our show that have spent time in the Ledbury kitchen and expressed of what they gained from the experience, but how tough it was as well, an environment. Well, do you have any stories or moments that really sort of helped you from that time there that you can share with us?
I've got lots of stories, but I think the first 6 months for me were very difficult. I wasn't. When you go to the library, you're employed as a chef de partie. You're not employed as a commie. And people that know what a de partie is, you're running a section. You have a prep list. You're in charge of the dishes solely. And like I said, I was naive, and I went down like every day for 6 months. Every day I went down. I wasn't liked in the kitchen because I affected the team. We got through it every day because everyone else has to step up, and I think that's like the camaraderie of the team and Brett and everything. He was tough, but he was fair, and he would give you like every chance to succeed. And they'll support you in that way. And that was the best thing about the library, was the camaraderie within the team. But it was very, very tough. And especially, yeah, like after the first 6 months of me just going down every day, it got easier. Just one day I was like, oh, I'm actually ready for service, or I'm moving so much faster. You don't realize it at the time, but you your pace and the way you work changes so quickly. And then, you move up to the next section, and then there's a new chef took your position, and then they're getting screamed at every day and yelled at every day, and they're going down. And then you're thinking, Jesus, like this guy is dragging us behind. And then, you realize, oh, that was me a few months ago. um, yeah. And it's very, but then over the couple of years, I moved section to section to section, and you learn every part of every kitchen. I didn't get quite to the top of fish and sauce, which is, I really wish could have stayed on and done that. But the time that I did spend there, I learnt so much. And when I came home, it was then that really shook me. It's like, oh my God, like, I've learned so much in those 2 years. And I'll be forever grateful for the library and Brett for what they've done for me.
Tell us about that period of time when you came back, because you made your way to Sydney and with the Bentley Group. What was that experience like compared to the library?
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of people that work at the library, Aussies, they come back and they're from Sydney and they go work at Sydney, or at Bentley, or they'll work at Bentley and then they'll go to London and work at library. So there's a lot of cross paths there. And that's how I sort of got the first connection there. But especially during COVID at the time when COVID hit, I will never forget when COVID happened, because it was probably the last 2 weeks I was in London. I was meant to finish 2 months later off my visa, and I was trying to get an extension on my visa. I was trying to get an extra year to stay at the library. The covers were going down, we're getting a bit quiet, and that was very unusual for us because, we're a fully booked restaurant every day. And obviously COVID news was happening, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, it's not a real thing. It's not going to reach us here. And then there was three of us, three Aussies at the time at the library, and Brett pulled us aside and said, and I'll be forever grateful for him for doing this. I think you guys should think about going home in a week, because, I'm hearing things that they're going to shut the airport, and you won't be able to get home, and we'll have to shut the restaurant, and you could be homeless. And at the time I was thinking, there's no way. There's no way. And he said, go home, think about it. And I went home and I spoke to my parents about it. And I was like, look, I'm going to come home in a couple of months. Brett said this, what do you think? And we had like a really hard, and I didn't want to leave. And then, I sort of said, you know what, maybe he's right. Maybe I should look into it. And then so I started looking at flights in a week or so. And then literally the next day, Brett's like, you need to go home. Don't work today. Get the next flight out of here. And I was like, crap. I was on the phone to my mum, and I was just like, can you get me a flight? Because he's saying this. And we started to see, like, the toilet paper was missing from the shelves and everything. It was very early on. And then even that day, a couple of restaurants in London had to shut because, they owed their supplies, and then, it was starting to take effect. And 2 days later, I flew out. And if I didn't get home, if I didn't leave that week, I would have been stuck in Europe for 3 months. And like I say this story because I know people that were jumping borders trying to find a way home, and they're living on the streets. Like, it was a very scary time. And I remember being at home watching the news and being like, oh my God, like, I was there. And if I didn't leave when I did, and if it wasn't for Brett, who was saying, you need to go home, yeah, it was definitely a memorable experience.
moving back to Sydney after that experience as well, and also the closures and the disruptions that happened in Sydney. What was it like in working for the Bentley Group during that time of sort of open and shut and sort of uncertainty?
Yeah. So I went to the Bentley Group straight after the first lockdown. So I was working in the ski fields while Melbourne had what's it called? The ring of I can't remember what it's called. When Melbourne was in lockdown, and I escaped from the Victorian border to Sydney. Um, and moving there, I had family up there. It was a bit more comfortable, so it was great. Like I sort of had that Ledbury mentality, but Bentley is very much, has a lot of native ingredients they use, and it had a bit more of an Australian feel. So that was really good, and I think it was there that I sort of realised how much I'd actually learned at the Ledbury because, I went from running the fish section going on to the meat section very quickly. And I was just like, I'm picking this up really quickly because it was that Ledbury mentality of, you need to move fast and learn fast. So that was very exciting. And the produce that they have up there it's fantastic.
You eventually made your way down to Melbourne and spent some time at Society. Tell us about that period of time and that move. Was that different for you?
It was. I think a part of it was also obviously Society was open and it was very exciting, but also I think it was a bit of homesickness as well. So I've obviously been away from home for over 3 years, and I had nieces growing up that I was missing out on, and I was sort of like time to go back home for a bit, and I sort of felt because I moved through Bentley a bit quickly, I was like I picked up what I need, and then going to Society opening team, I think that's something that I always wanted to achieve is being part of an opening team, opening a restaurant. And working at Society, like they are the veterans of opening restaurants. They're opening a restaurant every 6 months, and to see how they did it and operated, it's definitely like. Although I didn't go into that role in a senior role, but witnessing it, I learned a huge amount on how to organize a kitchen, like supplies, and that's like the skills there that I learned that I use today in my job.
At the top of the show, you mentioned that you've been in the Mornington Peninsula for a couple of years now, and you were at Paringa Estate previous to this role. How did the gig to move you to Mornington come about, and that decision? Take us through that.
Yeah, the difference for me was probably I wanted that creative freedom. So working at Society, it was a fantastic restaurant, and they did an amazing job. But if I wanted to work with a product and put it on the menu, I wasn't able to do that. So obviously Paringa is a smaller restaurant, and I had opportunity there to go and have a bit of influence on the menu and try out all these ideas that I've accumulated throughout my career because, I've had a notepad and, I pick up a thing here everywhere I work. And I'm like, what if I do this? What sort of using potato, I'll use a Jerusalem artichoke for that puree and see how it turns out. Stuff like that is something that I really wanted to do and had all these ideas. And that's where I got the opportunity at Paringa. So I was employed there as a sous chef, and then 9 months later, I was appointed the head chef, and that was where the real test happened because it was all on me.
Take us through that process. It's a big step and a big change. What sort of impact did it have on you?
I had a lot. I think one thing I didn't really realize as much is head chef, it's not just about creating dishes and running the pass and, cooking the food. It's all about managing people and running a team. I think that's one of the key things you need to get right to succeed in a kitchen is the teamwork and the communication, because I think when that's not flowing, it has a negative impact on the environment and the service. And I think that's a bit of the problem with the old school cooking is, it's no longer you've been told this is the way you do it, don't say anything. It's all about, all right, well, you got to explain the reasons why you do it. Why are we, bringing the quail out of the fridge half an hour early to bring it to temperature? Why are we doing this? Communication for me was the main lesson I learned at Paringa and teamwork, because if you're only as good as your team, and if your team isn't strong, you're never going to succeed. And that's something that I've definitely brought on when I've come in over here. We're obviously rebuilding a new team. We have some chefs that were here before me, but it's all about culture and building it from the ground up. Because if we can have a great working culture within our team, the sky's the limit and how we succeed. But if the groundwork's not right and the team's not working well, it'll come crumbling down at the end. So it's really important that we have the foundations right there with our kitchen team.
What's it been like for you, dealing with kitchen staff that have been there previously, but bringing in a new team and trying to build what you're talking about? Has it been challenging trying to build the team that you need to do what you want to do?
Yeah, it definitely has. And I think it's at the start, I was very honest with them, with, the goals for me, the goals for the restaurant. But I wanted them to be honest to me about what their goals were. I think that's really important. It's really tying in with their goals and our goals and seeing if they align, because that's really important. And for me, and that goes back to the producers of the peninsula. There's a lot of people that I work with now. Before I came along, they hadn't been to any local farms or distilleries or anything like that, and they really wanted to learn it. And I think that's something that I'm encouraging them to come along. So on our days off or after work, we'll go down and we'll meet a producer, and it's the fun part of the job, I suppose. And it's just like, all right, well, how can we bring that to work? How can we utilize that product and showcase that product? And that's probably one of my greatest tools that I'm using right now is, engaging the team and making sure they're enjoying it.
Being on the Mornington Peninsula is very different to the kitchen of the Ledbury and the energy of London as well. This sort of couple of years that you've been down there, what sort of impact has it had on you personally? Like, has it changed you as a person and sort of what you want to get out of life and also the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think 5 years ago, it was all about, all right, well, how much can I learn? How many hours can I work? Like how hard can I go in the kitchen and all that? And I think now I'm a father as well. I've got a 1-year-old and a wife at home. I'm very much in the mindset I need to have a work-life balance as well as my team, because I want the longevity of my career. And I think I see a lot of chefs, they work very hard and they're great chefs, but after 30 years, 40 years, they just come crumbling down. They can't do it anymore. So that's something that I'm really focused on.
Well, you've certainly risen the ranks quicker than many have in the industry. What sort of advice would you have for someone that's quite young coming into the industry to try and get the most out of it and, end up in an exec chef role like yourself where you can sort of lead a team and get the best out of them?
I would say just expose yourself as much as you can in terms of, where you're working, what you're reading, what you're watching on TV. Like, especially early in my career, everything was food focused. And especially in my career, like I'll spend a year or two at a restaurant. And I think that's something that's definitely strengthened me because, I know people that will stay at one restaurant for 5 or 7 years and they're not exposing themselves to the different types of cooking and the different variations, because everyone does things differently, and it's for them to work out, all right, well, what works best. And I think that's something that I've definitely done. Working for a lot of head chefs, I've worked for some great head chefs and I worked for some not so great. But, I've learned just as much from the bad head chefs than the good ones. I've learned what not to do, So I think, yeah, I've definitely always thought, I'm not going to do that when I'm a head chef or stuff like that. So I think that's definitely advice. And it is a tough industry. And I think the industry at, this time is struggling. And I think it's really going to separate the people that are really passionate and care about it. I think the ones that sustain through it are going to thrive at the end. I think it's going to show in 5 years.
Well, I know you've only been in this new exciting role for a couple of months now, but what do you love about what you're doing?
Oh, no, I think it's just sometimes, when you're trying to create a new dish for the new menu of the new season, there's struggles. So I'm like, oh, even now, there's a couple of ideas that I got, and I just can't get that right. But in the past, I'll spend a couple of months working on this dish, and I won't get it right, and then I finally get it right, and then the customers are loving it. They're like, "How did you create that?" And then you don't want to tell them that you've been thinking about it for 3 months, failing it. But I think that's when the positive moments is just like I finally get there. You finally like solve the riddle of this dish or this recipe, and you finally perfected it, or perfected it, but you got it to where you're happy with it. I think that's something that I really enjoy it, because it just sort of sums up my career of the struggles and finally seeing the light at the end.
Well, Nick, it's an absolute honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today. Looking forward to where you take things at the dining room from here. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Huck. Thanks for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Stay safe and be well.